stories from my own experience and my exposure, and I hope that will encourage you all to live your life wholly for a God who is totally worthy. Because that's what our life is to be about. It's about his fame and his glory. And when you're hanging on to his hand and looking up into his face, your journey through life will become an incredible adventure. I am living testament of that. It doesn't matter if it's through tragedies or triumphs, ups and downs, rich or poor, every single moment of every single day will become an adventure on your way to eternity. Because we have a God who is involved and invested in every detail of our lives, and he does it for our good. With her. Not me. As I mentioned earlier, I'm a firstborn. I'm an RN and I'm cautious. I hang on tightly with both hands and I carefully assess every situation. These are pictures of the real Sue Thomas, whose life inspired a TV series. I know some of you are familiar with the TV series. It's okay if you're not. It's based on the years that Sue worked at the FBI doing undercover surveillance work, doing lip reading. You see, Sue was profoundly deaf since she was an infant. She spent a decade going to speech therapy. She attended public school back in the 50s where they had no special classes for kids with special needs. They put her in the front row and she just tried to get through the class as best she could, trying to read those lips. Not even the teachers knew what to do with her. One of the most popular questions she ever got asked was, "How many years did you work at the FBI?" She would answer with this: "For 3.5 years, just long enough to get a TV show out of it." Interestingly, the TV show only lasted for 3 years. And it's been 22 years now since they filmed that last episode. That's Deanne Bray. That was the actress that played her part. You can see Sue there with her actual hearing dog, and then Deanne with the actress dog, and then next to, on the other side, there's Deanne and myself. Deanne recently reminded me of this clip right here. If you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. I'm here to tell you that God's plans are so much better. When you relinquish control of the reins, you may be in for quite a ride. You may have to hold on, but he is in control and life will become an adventure. Because we're put on this earth for a reason. Life is a journey of self-discovery, and one of the most difficult things we're ever going to discover is who we are. Discovering who we are goes completely against our nature. Our instinct is to cover up, turn our back, pull our safe and secure world a little closer around us like a security blanket, keep things looking good, especially in our Christian world. Everyone looks so good. You know what it's like if you go on Facebook and you see that perfect Thanksgiving table, every spoon in place, the food heaped, or you see that perfect family picture, and it kind of makes you feel a little sick because you know that's not really what your family's like. Underneath it all, the reality for every one of us is there's cracks. Or there's a crack that's breaking the branch of the family tree, and we're trying to reach out and to help that person, and we all go tumbling down with the weight of it all. I'm going to shift focus for a minute and share a few of the cracks in my own life, because I want you to know that I know what I'm talking about. My mom came from a family life where she experienced various forms of abuse. As a result, she struggled with showing us affection and love, and it created a damage and a crack in my own ability to receive love and to give it. And I can talk more about that in a minute. On the other side of the family tree, my father's parents got divorced in an age when divorce was rare back in rural Pennsylvania. Then one day, the boys disappeared. The police, then the FBI were called, and they discovered that the estranged father, my grandfather, had kidnapped them and taken them across state lines into Ohio. In fact, he took them to the farm where he had gotten a job. In fact, in the bigger picture of things, Satan meant it for evil, but God used it for good. Go back to the screen for a second. The little girl is my mom, and the little boy is my dad. And they met because that farm where my grandfather went was my mom's family. And so I'm here because of that situation. Satan meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. My parents were not believers when they were married. They were not even saved or even going to church until they were in their 30s. So I'm sharing all this because I want you to know that my background is not a series of a religious background with, a heritage of godliness. But when my parents did get saved, they did their best to give us a godly home. I was impressed by the missionary stories I read. My whole future lay before me. I went to nursing school. I remember when I first graduated as an LPN, and I know every one of us faces this when you're reaching adulthood and you feel like the whole world is out there in front of you, and what are you going to do with your life? I was working in a nursing home, and I remember how I had to consciously stop and think to put my hand on that little old lady's shoulder as I talked to her and handed her her medicine, because affection did not come naturally to me. Then one point, it looked like I might be going into Russia and working with those who had been affected by the Chernobyl incident. But I had started courses to become an RN, and I felt that the Lord was saying to me, if I put my hand to the plow, I needed to continue. I needed to be faithful in the small things. I need to be faithful, and then He would lead me. So I continued working on my RN degree, and God opened doors for me to work in a freestanding birthing clinic for the next 7 years. And there I met Julia, who here's a midwife in this community. I was immersed in a world of babies, home births. I was on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. But I was learning to be open and to listen to what the Lord wanted of me. And just like the slide says, the person, he who choreographs the stars in their courses, is also in charge of every detail of our lives. If He can keep those stars together and keep these planets spinning, there's not one thing in your life that's out of His control. And looking back, I can see that all along the way, God had been leading me and teaching me. It's just like what Corrie ten Boom said. Every experience that God gives us, every person that He brings into our life, is the perfect preparation for a future that only He can see. So once we've discovered who we are, no matter what we're doing, we also have to learn to be transparent and genuine. People feel with their hearts, and they can tell if you're relating to them out of compulsion, or you think they're your new pet project. We are so blind to ourselves. Too many times we say one thing and we do another, and we really don't have it in our hearts. And unfortunately, unbelievers are the first to see that hypocrisy, and they will point it out to us very quickly. We are just too busy trying to keep up a good reputation, and we forget that God calls us to be real. So I'm here sharing a little bit about my own struggles, a little bit about my own broken past, because we have to be real about our struggles and real about our sins and real about our brokenness and how we're not even able to live up to our own expectations. And it's only when we're real about ourselves that God will be glorified in us. We have to learn to be honest enough to admit our cracks but not focus on them. We need to focus on the Lord and being filled with Him. Only then can He shine through us. Anyway, with that 24 hours, 7 days a week, being on call, I was burning out physically. I was dealing with heart palpitations from lack of sleep and other health issues. I was only in my early 30s at that time, so I pulled back on my schedule and began to ask God what He wanted me to do with the rest of my life. I clearly remember that February 27th in 2004. We had out-of-state company. My guest and I were at a friend's house for a busy social evening. They had a big family, lots of kids. I had a blinding headache. And then I got the phone call as I pulled in the parking lot at their house. Would I be willing to go in and do a night shift for this lady who had congestive heart failure? She was failing, and the daughter, who was deaf, would not rest. And they thought if there would be an RN in the house, that just maybe the daughter would actually go upstairs and go to bed. And I said yes. Why did I say yes? So after we left my friend's house, which I didn't enjoy at all, I went back home and I'm waiting and I'm watching the clock tick. 10 o'clock, 10:15, 10:20, 10:30. And I sat on my bed and I actually cried. Why did I say I was going to do this job? A little lady with gray hair and very animated, intense eyes met me at the door. She introduced herself as Sue Thomas. She was profoundly deaf, but an incredible lip reader and very expressive. I immediately felt overwhelmed, not sure I could handle that much energy in my condition that night. After showing me around very enthusiastically and introducing me to her mom, who was in a coma, and showing me where I could find a teacup to make tea in the middle of the night, and showing me where the puzzle was if I needed something to do to keep busy, she said, "I hear you're a Christian." It's really not what you want to hear when you go on a job. I mean, you do, but you don't really want to be queried about it. I have a question for you. Do you deem yourself a conservative, a liberal, or a radical? What in the world? Because those words mean different things to different people. Like, I'm conservative, but the Bible says we're supposed to be liberal people in all things, right? So I paused and I thought it through, and then I answered with, what do you think I said? Radical. A radical for the Lord. She liked the answer. So what's your favorite hymn? Was her next question. Mind you, it's after 11 o'clock at night, and I just had a rough day, and I really didn't want to talk like this. I wanted her to go to bed so I could sit down. I didn't know that when I knocked on the door that night as the nurse for her mom for that night shift, that my life would be forever changed and that my growth in Christ would go into warp speed. You see, that next morning around 5 o'clock, her mom slipped into eternity. A few days later, Sue gave me a cassette tape of her telling her own story. That tape was called Silent Night, and it's a little bit out of print. I'd like to kind of get it back into circuit as a cassette tape, so I got to find a way to get it into something that we can use digitalized. But in it, she told her story, and she talked about how the deaf are an unreached people. And she talked about the millions of deaf around the world, not just here in the U.S., but say in India, where there's like 12 million deaf people in the eastern part of the world that will never hear the gospel unless somebody takes it to them face to face, because they cannot hear. So they're not going to hear it on the radio. And many deaf did not, especially in other countries, they don't read well. And so I just felt that conviction from the Lord. And I went on my knees on the side of my bed with tears running down my face and goosebumps on my arms. And I said, "Lord, I don't know what you're doing, but somehow I know that you brought this lady into my life." Had I not gone to that job that night, I would never have met Sue Thomas and spent the next 20 years of my life as her traveling companion, ministering around the world together. What I didn't know, because I didn't see the whole picture, was while my Lord was faithfully directing my steps, the enemy was trying to take me out by attacking my weakness. And where I was feeling the most vulnerable, he was shaking the limb and trying to knock me off. because God was in the middle of doing something. God had plans for me. And I felt like Jonah when I sat down and cried. And I did not want to keep going forward, but God kept nudging me. At that time, they were still filming that TV series, Sue Thomas, FBI. It was only a few days after that Sue asked me if I would take a trip with her when she did one of her speaking tours. Now remember this, I knew nothing about the TV show, and I actually had to go home and Google Sue Thomas and the TV show to find out who she was and did I even want to be involved in this world. So I took some time to pray about it, and I came back to her with the yes answer. I'll never forget her excited words. You will have to hang on, she said. I can't promise you much, but this I can promise you, it will be an incredible journey. She was speaking from experience because she knew that the God who created the universe was personally involved in every single detail, even the most obscure parts of her life, and she trusted him. Was she ever right? Life with Sue was a real ride. That first year I traveled with her, we spent 298 nights in hotels. There's only 365 days in a year. We met hundreds of thousands of people from medical conferences, Christian retreats, deaf schools in Japan, auditoriums of public schools all across this country where she would go in and she would share her story and she would always talk about the Lord. Whether fundraising for service dog organizations or whether we were having lunch with Hollywood agents and film producers. Sue's life was a contrast from one extreme to the other. We went from Hollywood to home births. We went from staying in a primitive cabin at Sue Thomas Ministries in Vermont to catching a limo. I say that like we catch limos every day. Took a bus, and then the limo met us at the bus station and took us to the castle out on Long Island. We did MS patient programs, mission trips into third world countries. In the same year, we shook hands with Billy Ray Cyrus, a country music star, and brother Andrew, who was known as God's smuggler. We also met with, this is Deanne Bray's husband, Troy, when he won an Oscar at the Academy Awards in 2022. So we went from that world to being out on the streets with the homeless, with Operation Silent Night, which was a homeless outreach that Sue started and we did for 19 years. Sue floated seamlessly from being an actress to sharing her Christian testimony with the Amish in Holmes County. I say seamlessly because Sue was not someone who ever tried to impress, and she never had to try to change to fit in. She was who she was, who she was. She was open and available to whatever God threw our way, and she never let it go to her head. Because the instant it goes to our head, we become self-conscious and we're no longer usable to God. Oswald Chambers, who said something like this: when we become conscious of being used by God, we lose the bloom of the touch of the Lord. I quickly learned that whenever God opened a door, without hesitation, Sue boldly went through it, looking for opportunities to be a fragrance and a light. So that picture was taken at the Ark down near the Creation Museum. For example, a few months after I met Sue, we were invited by the president of Revolution Studios to be his guest at a fundraising dinner in Hollywood. The connection was that his daughter had MS, and he had heard Sue speak at an MS patient program. Every plate of food was $10,000. Each plate was worth $10,000. That's what they had to pay to get in. The caliber of entertainment would have had most people starstruck. I had no clue who these people were. I didn't even recognize names. I had to go home and look people up. All I know is that my mind was blown when in just a few hours they had raised over $3.7 million. It was pure Hollywood with rich executives, agents, and movie stars, and there I sat in a simple blue denim dress. Well, it was a little bit stylish because Sue had seen it in a hotel window and in the gift shop, and it had some sequins down the front. It was just a simple blue dress, and she said, "That looks like you, I'm gonna get that for you," and I'd never paid that much for a dress before. So she bought it for me, and there I was with my Birkenstock sandals, a little denim dress, and my white veiling. I felt so self-conscious and out of place until I looked around, and I realized that some of those country stars were also wearing denim jeans and had their Western style shirts on and their boots, and I thought, I'm not too out of place after all. My shoulders straightened, and I realized God had put me there as his ambassador. In fact, maybe I was a trendsetter even, who knows? I knew it was not my world. I'm just a small town girl who wanted to serve God. I often heard Sue say this: they put their blue jeans on in Hollywood the same way anyone else does in the rest of the world, one leg at a time. One of the greatest examples Sue ever gave me was in her instant obedience to the Word of God. Without a hesitation, once she knew that this was what the Lord wanted, she did it. She dared to be different and not worrying about what people would think. And she continued to walk through every open door. Speaking for large medical conferences, whatever it was, she would share her life story. And God would honor that. She talked about Christ, and he would open another door and another door. Many times we were in California or New Mexico one day, and we would be in Boston or Washington, D.C. the next day on the red-eye flight. I tell you, I was taking vitamins to keep up with her. She was an Energizer bunny. And as we zigzagged across the country, at the end of many of her speeches, when she would open up for questions, there was always that brave person who would say, "Are you Amish or Mennonite? Or what is that on your head?" She loved it. It was an opportunity to talk about her Lord. And she would respond with this: "No, I'm not a Mennonite, but I am a woman of faith and I believe in Jesus. Do you believe in Jesus?" I was reading his word one day, and I saw right there in 1 Corinthians 11 where it talks about women covering their heads in the presence of angels. She didn't start with man, woman, submission, which, people are going to reject instantly. But everyone is interested in angels. Even if you don't believe in God, people believe in angels. Figure that. And she would go on to say this: "I saw in the Word of God that by wearing a head covering, I would have the power of angels on my head. And I realized I need all the help I can get." And if you don't get what I'm saying, just look at it this way. I am Sue Thomas, FBI, and I'm undercover. Of course, this would have everybody laughing, and it would break up any tension or awkwardness of that moment. And surely enough, at the end, at the book table, there would always be someone who would come up and say, "What reference did you say that was? My grandmother gave me a Bible. I should go look it up." And she saw it as an opportunity to get people into the Word of God. She didn't need to try to convince people or convict people. Let the Word of God do that. Just get them in the Word. Even non-Christians would come up, and they'd be like, "Yeah, I might have a Bible somewhere." Most people only saw her energy and the passion she had to encourage others. She never said no to an open door. And I'm telling you, that's why I'm here, because I have taken that same position. And when I saw that God was taking me to Montana and he began to open doors, I said, sure. And I am not a person who stands in front of a crowd and talks. But if God says, this is what I want you to do, I'll walk through it. And God, you have to give me the words. People only saw that energy. They didn't realize that not only was she deaf, but she had progressing, relapsing MS, was pre-diabetic, and her heart was giving out. The stress of traveling like this can't be good for your MS, I would say, cautiously. It's not stressful, she'd say, with a grin. It's fun. Those early years traveling with Sue were just a whirlwind. Often the clothes would go from the suitcase straight into the washing machine and right back into the suitcase. And you only needed a couple outfits because nobody ever saw you wearing the same thing over and over because you were in a different part of the country. And the world did not see Sue's other constant traveling companion, the extreme fatigue, the electrical jolts of pain that she felt from the MS, the blind episodes she had from inflammation on the optic nerve. As her nurse, I developed an eye for those little cues that told me she was crashing long before she came down from the platform. I could see her up there. I could see her close her eyes, take a breath, and I'd just be praying her on as she was speaking. And she would find the strength to finish what she had to say, and she always closed by singing her song, Silent Night. And then she would come down off the stage, and she would head to the book table in the back, where she would meet more people, hear their stories through an interpreter, and offer even more words of encouragement. She would finally get to the hotel room, head straight to bed. As time went on, it would take days for her to recuperate from the few hours that she was with people. Facing those odds, my inclination would have been to just give up and sit down. But not Sue. With dogged determination, she kept plowing forward, even through the thickest of afflictions. And I often would hear her say this to herself: "My Father is the God of all comfort, who comforts me in all of my afflictions so that I can comfort those afflicted with the comfort that I myself have received from God." Maybe you've heard someone say this slightly sarcastic statement: "I don't want to be so heavenly minded, I'm no earthly good." But watching Sue, I realized the opposite. Because the more heavenly minded we are, the more good we're actually going to be on this earth. If we're truly heavenly minded, not just being superior religious, not just being, I guess the word is religious. Instead of going through the day in a frantic frenzy, it's good for us to have a deeper understanding of the purpose of life. Our lives are to be like a fragrance rising up to God in every aspect, in the home life, in our public life, in our private life where no one sees us, and in our thought life. Sue had a contagious exuberance and a joy of living, and a way of connecting with people in a real way that left a lasting impression on me. We went into public schools and shared stories of being bullied, and in gymnasiums of hundreds of kids, you could hear a pin drop. They were sitting perfectly still. Of course, Sue had no idea it was that quiet. She was in the quietness all the time, and she would just say, "Well, they have to sit and focus really hard on my funny voice. That's why they're so quiet." She didn't realize that she was actually reaching their hearts. We also did international travel. For example, we went to Japan, where she spoke in churches and schools. We met with a deaf woman who was a survivor of the Nagasaki atomic bomb. When that bomb was dropped on that city, she was out in the fields working with the other deaf people. And she remembers watching people screaming, running down the streets with their flesh dripping off of their bodies. And for dozens of years, the deaf had no idea what happened because the country was in a chaos, and people were not taking the time to communicate face to face with the deaf. And many times the deaf were displaced because her family had actually been decimated with the bomb. We visited Corrie ten Boom's house. I meant to get that slide up there, and I wasn't able to get that in. We crawled inside the hiding place. Y'all have heard of Corrie ten Boom. Then we visited her home when she lived in California. And we went to the cemetery where Corrie is buried, right there, right here. I guess I'm on the West Coast, aren't I? It's not that far. That would be worth a field trip for you homeschooling families. Do you know that Corrie, where she's buried in that cemetery, the graves that are closest to her are Jewish people? I don't think that's an accident. I think that the Lord designed that. There's a testimony there to have that Christian woman's grave surrounded by Jewish people. We ministered in both men's and women's prisons in Costa Rica. As she opened her speeches there by saying this: "I know what it's like to live in solitary confinement, And she would talk about her deafness and how isolating it was and the anger that she felt. And believe me, those tough, tattooed Hispanic men that were imprisoned for life, I watched tears in their eyes. One man came up afterwards and asked our interpreter, "Where did you find this lady?" We went through the gate and across the dirt floor and into this outdoor amphitheater area, and she's in a wheelchair, right? And she looks so unassuming, but the power of God rested upon her. Oh, here, I should have done a couple more slides. This is the deaf survivor. And I can tell you a short story about this lady, since I have her picture up at the moment. Sue looked at her and said, "I know your secret." And that lady turned around and looked at her. And mind you, we are speaking, Sue is speaking in English. It's being translated into ASL, then Japanese Sign Language for the benefit, or ASL then into Japanese Sign Language for the benefit of this woman. And the woman quickly turned and looked at Sue like, "What do you mean you know my secret?" And Sue said, "You have no fear because you have seen the worst of what man can do to man." And that was the atomic bomb. And she said, "But God has sent me across the ocean to talk to you about something." And she went right for it. I mean, Sue was somebody who shot from the hip. She went for the throat, right? This was Sue Thomas. And she said, "I came because I want to tell you about Jesus." And she said, "I know you might believe in Buddha, but did Buddha ever die for your sins and come back to life again?" And I'm just sitting there like, what? I thought we were going to talk to her about the atomic bomb or something. We had a much more important message that we needed to discuss. She had a ministry, even from a hospital bed, when she was admitted for a simple procedure of putting a pacemaker in for that heart that was wearing out. It turned into a 14-day hospital stay and 8 weeks of physical therapy, because the doctor who put the pacemaker in punctured her lung with one of the wire leads, and when she came into recovery, she couldn't breathe. Instead of blaming God or getting angry, she saw that God was directing her steps to now be a witness. In her own words, she said this, "Not only can I now proclaim him in the heart department, but now also in the lung department and the physical therapy department." I sat back and I marveled. Instead of being angry, she embraced it as God's path for her. As I mentioned, whenever God opened a door, Sue boldly and bravely walked through it, even if she was in a wheelchair. She often said, "What God ordains, he will sustain. Whatever he brings in your path, he will give you the strength, and he has a purpose." You see what I mean about living adventurously? Not everything was a feel-good moment. Not everything was a Hollywood moment. She even learned how to accept affliction as a gift from the hand of God. And her attitude was not always like that. If you know her story at all, the real Sue Thomas, or if you've read her book, you will know that Sue was laughed at for having a funny accent and for not fitting in. In school, she was bullied. In fact, she would be at the drinking fountain and the boys would come up behind her and push her head down in the water. She couldn't hear them coming. She never knew. They would stick their foot out and trip her and then laugh. And she couldn't hear it coming. I should say she couldn't see it coming, but she couldn't hear it coming. She was just a deaf girl sitting in the front row, missing everything that was happening. Class after class, year after year, she hated school. You can read those stories. I have the books at the book table as you're going out. There's a couple of books. Silent Night talks about that, and even Staying in the Race. There's a DVD back there of Sue also telling her own story in her own words. In spite of rough beginnings, she had an extremely high IQ. She loved people, and she successfully managed to navigate the hearing world. But she also had a very strong personality and a strong will. And if you're dealing with a strong-willed child, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Sue often talked about how that strong will in the hands of Satan is used for destruction. But in the hands of God, if that will is yielded, and his Spirit is flowing through it, he can turn it into a beautiful thing for his glory. He knows exactly what to do with it because he's the one who created that will. He knew who to give it to, and he knows that you need it for strength to get through life. But that first trip that I took with Sue, we went to Washington, D.C. We were in a hotel there. Night after night, we were up almost all night as she poured out the brokenness of her own life. You see, the world saw her as a celebrity. Her agency had gotten her a contract with the pharmaceutical company as a celebrity speaker for the MS Society. That involved 5-star hotels, limos. Week after week, we were on the road traveling. And people were like, "Oh, can I come and give you a hug, Sue Thomas? I read your book. I just want to touch you." And she was just like, "I'm just another human being." Sue wanted me to know that she was a real person with real problems. And she let me know that if I had been starstruck by her celebrity status, she never would have asked me to travel with her. She needed someone who saw her for who she really was and would keep her feet on the ground. She knew she was just walking through whatever door God opened, and she knew that God had used that TV show to give her a great big platform so that she could continue to share with people all over the world about God's love and about his forgiveness and how he had changed her life from a very angry, strong-willed person into somebody who loved to serve him. And she would often say this, "You invited me here today as a big celebrity. Big, yes. Celebrity, no." As you could see, she could laugh at herself pretty easily. She would say, "I am one of God's greatest sinners saved by his grace alone." And then she showed me what it was to live adventurously. So I can tell you, when you're hanging on to the hand of the Father, he will take you places that are completely unexpected. He will take you out on a limb sometimes. Do you know what that means, to go out on a limb? According to the dictionary, it means being in a place where you have to be vulnerable and willing to take risks. The biblical definition includes dying to yourself that Christ may live in you for the sake of winning others. And I watched that over and over. And I'm going to ask you today, if you consider yourself to be a Christian, that's what it means to follow Christ. You have to die to yourself that Christ might live in you. It means putting your hand in God's and walking through whatever open door he puts in front of you. It means intentionally engaging with others and being real and genuine. We first have to be real and genuine about ourselves, though, and who we are. We're broken people. We first have to admit, outside of our own circles, that we don't have it all together. And we have to be vulnerable and be willing to go deep. Jesus said, "I call you friends." He was not being big-headed. He did not come across with an attitude of superior importance. He came down to our level as an equal. He gave up everything to leave his home in glory and a perfect relationship with his Father. He had comfort. He had all the honor from the angels anyone ever could imagine. And he came and he walked among a broken mess of people who lashed out at each other with pain and anger and frustration, and lashed out at him to the point of death. In other words, he became one of us. And it's the same for us. If we're going to call ourselves Christians, we need to be getting real. We have to learn how to be honest and humbly walk through life. We should never look down on someone, no matter how small or insignificant they are. We might achieve fame and power and recognition or be successful in business, but if it goes to our head, we are nothing like Christ. So my challenge is this: do you want to live adventurously for the Lord? What do you think I'm going to say? You have to walk through every single door he opens. It may be a door of pain. It may be a door of joy, but you have to walk through It may be something as small as holding the door open for someone at the grocery store, or a kind word. You just have to be faithful in small things. And the first thing you have to grapple with is, who am I? Who are you in all those small things of life? What situations have you been through that God is using to shape you into the person He wants you to become? Because He uses the situation He puts us in, our home life, our church life, our circumstances, our financial situation. He uses our jobs, and our struggles, and our difficulties to shape us. The second question is, what is God's vision for my life? We make plans and we have dreams and we have all these things we intend to do, but the real issue we need to stop and think about is this: who did God create you to be? Because before the beginning of time, He picked you, and He has a plan for you and for your life. You need to take time to discover what that is before you just start plowing forward with living. You need to ask Him and then move forward one step at a time. And go through open doors. And He will flow through you then, because you will be an empty vessel for Him to fill. All right, for those of you who've been waiting for a little bit more about Sue Thomas and Levi, this is the real Sue Thomas with the real Levi. And I'm going to tell a little Levi story, because every single little thing that God creates is important and has purpose. Levi was one of those little things, and he has a pretty amazing story. He is a dog who totally changed Sue Thomas's life. And here's why. Doreen was the hearing dog trainer. She found Levi at the dog pound. He was already scheduled to be euthanized. Does anyone know what that means? All right, I'm in Montana. He was scheduled to be put down because he was considered unadoptable. And he was actually a very good-looking, young, reddish golden retriever. 3 different times he had been adopted out by a family and taken to a new home. And it just wasn't working out. And he would be returned to the shelter. And every time he went back to that shelter, he had to deal with the noise of the barking dogs, the rejection, and the fact that no one loved him. And believe me, dogs have emotions. I was going to say personality, but it's actually dogality, right? They don't have personality. So Doreen heard about this dog, this golden retriever, at the shelter, and she had to go check him out because she had a new client that had come to the training program, a deaf lady, who insisted that if she got a hearing dog, it had to be a golden retriever. And it's because Sue actually had Irish setters prior to that, and she did not want no little yappy dog. Not that she could hear it, but they moved too much and they bounce around, and that would have been a little too much for her eyes to take in. And so Doreen saw this dog and she went to check him out. And he was scheduled to be put down like the next day. And she took the dog back to the training center. Levi just lay on the floor. He barely looked at her. He was feeling so rejected, and he had so much pain in his heart, he did not even know how to trust. He could hardly pick his head up. His ears were down, his tail was tucked between his legs, and Doreen realized she had a problem. So she took him back to her own home, and she laid on the floor next to him with a couple of treats, and it took days. But she was persistent, and she won his trust. When he finally made eye contact and he took a treat from her hand, she knew she was making progress, but that it was going to take a long time for healing. He had suffered terribly at the hands of humans. He had been very abused, probably beaten. He was afraid of men. He was afraid of sticks or anything that looked like a stick, like a broom. He was terrified of loud noises. No one had ever taught him anything. He didn't know how to behave. He didn't know how to sit, nothing. I don't know anything about you guys, Maybe you've lived a perfectly happy life with a loving family and no personal conflicts or issues. So if that's you, you don't have to listen to anything else I'm going to say, okay? Because I'm not going to talk to you. I'm going to talk to everyone else. I'm going to talk to those of us who know what it's like to come from a situation where there's brokenness. Broken relationships, broken hearts, conflict, trauma, confusion, frustration, any other kind of damage. That's really the norm for most of us. Frustration, you get angry. I mean, I know what that is. And Sue Thomas does too. I mean, in her teenage years, she was actually suicidal. She just couldn't cope with life. She was so hurting. And like I said, no matter how good we try to live a perfect life, it's a broken world. And we are living under a curse because of sin. And we're very selfish. So back to Levi. Here he was in the pound, broken and useless, but God saw him. And God had his hand on him and had a plan for him and saved him from certain destruction and death because he had a plan and a purpose for that little thing. First, Levi had to learn to trust Doreen the trainer. Then she had to teach him all the things a service dog needs to know, starting with basic obedience, proper socialization, then adding the special skills and the hearing work. Eventually, she trained him to alert, and then she began to train him to relate to Sue, and he proudly graduated as a certified hearing dog. We're just like Levi. We might not have a big plan or an important purpose, or we might think no one notices us. You might be sitting here thinking, there's not much I can do or be in life. I'm just stuck up here in Plains, Montana. And I want you to remember this. Levi, a broken dog, traumatized, deemed useless, and ready to be put out of his misery. And that might be just how you feel sometimes. Levi had no idea that he was going to become a household name around the world. In the right hands and with the right training, he went from being a broken thing to a beautiful thing for the glory of God. And you know what else? Levi never knew that. You might feel like your life, where you are, might not be making any difference, but the impact of what you do, being faithful in the small things, has a ripple effect. Levi left a legacy, a world-renowned name, a little broken dog that was scheduled to be put down. But because he learned to trust and then he obeyed in the small areas, his life made a huge impact in the world. In fact, today I still get fan mail for Levi from all over the world, and I've learned that there's people that have named their dogs, even little yappy chihuahuas, and I grew up with chihuahuas, so I like chihuahuas, named Levi because they've watched the TV show. I mean, Levi is probably the most popular character in the whole show. And he never knew that. He went from being broken to being somebody or something that encourages people all over the world. And I should insert right here that TV show was not only shown in every state in this country and in Canada, but it was also shown in 54 nations around the world. So the name of Sue Thomas has become a household name around the entire world. And I still get fan mail today, or I'll hear of people from like Malaysia or Spain, or right now they're watching in England and Scotland. They must be showing it somewhere there because I'm starting to get some comments from people in those countries. France, there's a young woman who's trying to find it in French so her mother can actually see it and understand it. So Sue's story of being a broken person and her dog who was broken is touching lives of people all over the whole entire world. You will never find satisfaction and adventure and excitement and glory by getting out there and grabbing it for yourself. Because by trying to grab it for yourself, you have to push other people down, and you're climbing up on top of them. And Jesus says it's the opposite. It's by laying down your life that you will truly find life and you will live. And I can tell you that is how you will really live adventurously. God is looking for hearts that are tuned into him, and he'll begin using you right where you are. He's going to take you where he put you with your brokenness, your unique family dynamics, your struggles, and he will breathe life into them, and he's going to give you incredible purpose. I just came across a verse yesterday in Revelations 3:8, and I thought, how perfect is this? I know all the things you do, and I've opened a door for you that no one can close. You have little strength, yet you obeyed my word and did not deny me. And I thought, wow, I got to work that in there somewhere. That just fit exactly what I'm talking about. But God will only do it if he sees that we are wholeheartedly giving him the glory. If we're holding any of the glory back for ourselves, he will not use us, and your life will not be an adventure. Or it will be an adventure of the wrong kind. And what we're trying to do will just fizzle into nothingness, and it will leave very little impact. So I'm going to say today, just let go and trust God, because there's no better place than to be in the hands of God. In 2016, we spent a month among the indigenous ministries in Andhra Pradesh in South India. That ministry had no Western connections. It's a church that got started, or a fellowship, I don't even know if it was a church or a group of churches that got started because 150 years ago, apparently an American missionary from Canada went to South India, and then 3 generations later, the Indian people are still serving God. We met a Christian brother who has his master's degree in English and who decided he needed to come to an unaccredited little Bible school to get better rooted in the Word of God. And Sue was there speaking to the students. And he came up to us, his name was Solomon, and he came up to us and asked if Sue would be interested in going to India. Of course she wanted to go to India. Wait a minute, Sue, we can't go to India. You're in a wheelchair. We have a service dog. They don't even recognize service dogs in India. What happens if we get to the border and they don't let us in with the dog? I mean, it wasn't even any paperwork we were supposed to do. I said, people die of heat in India that don't even have MS, and MS and heat are not friends. At that time, Sue was just recovering from a stroke. She was still pretty much wheelchair bound. Here she is with her rolling walker. She was just getting back on her feet. She was very frail with MS. But she was convinced that God had opened a door, so we were going to go. So guess what I did? I said, well, okay, I'll make sure our passports are up to date. Lord, please close the door. Okay, well, I'll apply for visas. God, we don't have the money to do this. We don't have the time. All right, well, I'll make contact over there and find out, do they have Western-style toilets? Because we can't go if I have to keep picking you up off the ground. Okay, yes, we're going to be okay. The door opened, we got on that plane, and we went 19 hours to South India. That trip became one of the highlights of our life. Sue and me both thoroughly enjoyed that trip. Even though she was mostly confined to her wheelchair, we traveled to multiple villages in South India. Villages where mud huts were roofed with banana palms and where there was no electricity and running water. Village after village, no other American in sight. We had 2 young men that were our interpreters that had studied English. And we met with, I don't know if I have pictures of this. They would gather together the children from the local schools who had studied some English but never had a chance to practice it on a native speaker. And they were just dying to come and meet us and to talk to us with English. In village after village, people crowded in the dirt road to hear the words of encouragement. We'd pull up to a village, they would set up the karaoke machine, the air conditioner would be blowing Sue's hair. Let's see if I have another picture here. It's another example. The air conditioner would be blowing Sue's hair to keep her cool in the heat of India. And she would be offering words of encouragement through an interpreter. And as you can see here, this young man, his grandfather brought him for prayer. And he had been hit by a vehicle and lost his leg. And Sue's heart immediately went out to him, because here's another cripple. Here's somebody who had a difficult time walking just like she did. And you can see her right there. She is speaking to him face to face, eye to eye. She's speaking English, and the man in the plaid shirt is interpreting into Telugu. She had such a connection with people. And you can see in the other picture, one of the villages where we were gathered. I mean, this was just an incredible experience. Or she would just be offering prayer for these people. We went from village to village, just meeting people and offering words of encouragement. Or there were times where we would be in an open outdoor amphitheater with thousands of people gathered out on the grass in their traditional native clothing. And Sue would be telling her testimony and her life story. I remember one woman who came up to us at the end of our visit and shook her head in amazement that Sue Thomas would come all this way across the ocean in her wheelchair to bless the Indian people. That had inspired her that she needed to get up, go to her neighbor, go to the next village, and to make a difference. And here Sue thought all along she was there talking about the love and forgiveness of Jesus. She didn't realize that the true message was, and I heard this from the people, God's strength is made perfect in our weakness. We were packing up to leave when one pastor's married daughter came up to our quarters. Miss Sue Thomas, she said, I've learned so much from you while you were here, but I learned the most from Rodney. This is Rodney. He is Sue's fourth service dog. She had Levi, then she had Amazing Grace, then she had Katie. Katie was trained for her MS and for her deafness. And then Rodney. Rodney was trained for her deafness and MS. He was a very, very, very calm, laid-back Labrador Retriever. What could she have learned from Rodney? So if nothing else you take from these lessons today, we've gone to the dogs tonight, okay, between Levi and Rodney. She said she was watching Rodney, and she noticed how he would look up into Sue's eyes, and Sue would give the command, and how eagerly he waited for the voice of his mistress, the voice of her, waiting for that loving voice of approval to say, well done, good job. And it showed her that we are not to serve God out of duty, out of fear, out of obligation, or tradition, or habit. Watching Rodney listen for Sue's voice and then joyfully doing her requests taught her that she should be looking up to the face of her master, waiting for his commands, and that she should do it with joy. All right, does anybody remember 2020? Crazy year for us. Sue was diagnosed in May. The day before her birthday, we got the news that she had stage 4 lung cancer. Now, you know enough about Sue Thomas at this point. Do you think that slowed her down? I watched her embrace whatever God allowed to afflict her. She received it as from the hand of God. She knew he had a purpose in it, and she began to bless and encourage every nurse and doctor and janitor that walked through our door. It was 2020. We spent 6 months of that year in the hospital. They knew the dog by name. I don't know if they knew my name, but because I had to walk him multiple times of the day. And they allowed me in the hospital because I was her RN, and because everybody wore a mask, which meant what? She could read nobody's lips. So a doctor would walk in the room and start talking to her, and she had no clue what they were saying. Lab technician would walk in, grab her by the arm, and jam a needle in, and she had no idea what was going on, and she would be like, startle reflex. And so I was sleeping so lightly on the extra couch that was in that room. And because if I was in the room with Sue, I didn't have to wear a mask, but if I stepped into the hall, I had to put a mask on. but I had to walk Rodney multiple times a day, so the whole hospital got to know us very well. And Sue would crack this joke. She would say, that was her rod and I was her staff, and we comforted her. And she would say to the cleaning lady, do you know you have one of the most important jobs in the entire hospital? No one likes the dirty hospital, especially the doctors during COVID. The hospital couldn't even be running if it wasn't for you. And that lady who might be exhausted with all the extra cleaning because of COVID would be beaming when she left the room. And she would, even if she was assigned on the other end of the unit, she would come and visit us before she left to go home. In fact, word got out that we had a dog in the hospital. And if you remember 2020 and COVID, nobody was allowed in the hospitals, no visitors, none of that. But Rodney and I were there, and again, it was appointed by God. As I said earlier, hospital ministry, right? We had nurses coming down from the COVID floor. I had 4 patients die today. I need to pet a dog. Can I pet your dog? And they would wrap their arms around Rodney, and they would cry. Rodney had his own ministry in that hospital. And of course, Rodney was allowed to be there because of the American Disabilities Act, which you cannot really turn away an officially, properly trained service dog with someone who has a true disability. I watched this over and over. Sue was on oxygen, she couldn't breathe. They drained her lungs. They took 2.5 liters of fluid out from the pleural space around her lungs. I talked to Brandy, she didn't think I should really put that picture up there. But it's incredible that she could even breathe at all. She was literally drowning in her own fluid. All the IVs, the tests, the therapy, and she began to realize that each situation was an open door, and it came from God, because he was not going to withhold any good thing from her, and because he directed her steps, and because he loved her. It was just as big of a door to go into that hospital as it was to go in a limo down Hollywood Boulevard. With her frailness when she got COVID, so actually, we did a lot of alternative things as well as some traditional things, and she beat that cancer. 1 week after her PET scan came back completely clear with no evidence of disease, I wasn't feeling well. I went and got tested. And I came through the door, and I said, this is exactly what happened. I came walking through the door, and I said, Sue, I tested positive for COVID. And she said, are you gonna die? Because we were seeing everything that was happening, right? And all of a sudden, it was within our own home. And 2 days later, she was very, very sick as well. And we think we actually got it from one of the visiting nurses that had come to see us, because we had practiced extreme, strict isolation because of her MS and because of her cancer. So here she is, cancer-free. 1 week later, she's on a ventilator. She crashed at 2 a.m. And I was not able to go with her to the hospital because I was still positive for COVID. But she really didn't need me, as you can see in that picture. She was in a coma for 3 weeks. And then slowly she began to recover from that. But I heard the doctors, I overheard the pulmonologist say, nope, she's never gonna come off the vent. Not with her history. She has MS, she's got lung cancer. And I thought, you don't know Sue Thomas. And sure enough, the day they extubated her, took the tube out. This might be a problem. This should be plugged in. How come it's not plugged in? All right, let's keep going. I heard her saying, I'm alive, I'm alive. I could hear her as I got off the elevator, and I recognized that voice. She was so happy to be alive. At the end of 2022, God took her home rather unexpectedly, and suddenly her stomach ruptured from an ulcer. It wasn't anything that we had foreseen. She went into the hospital, and they were not able to do anything. And I was the one that had to go to her and get her to focus on my lips. She was still awake and conscious, and I said, "There's nothing they can do, Sue. You're going to now go home to see Jesus." She looked at me, and I had to repeat it twice. And I saw that look on her face as she recognized, there we go, what she was saying. Why is, I was going to say, this is plugged in. I would love to show you the ending of these pictures. That might be it. All right.
Just to make sure this is.
Turn it back on. All right, I'll get it back up. Is this still on too? Okay. I watched her focus shift from walking through the doors of this earth to walking through that door of heaven. Didn't I tell you that when she believed that if God opened the door, she was going to walk through it no matter what? She visibly walked right off the set of this life into the scene of glory. I miss her, not just the adventure, but I miss her very being, that huge personality, that larger than life presence that filled up every day of my life for 20 years. That, my friends, is the true story of Sue Thomas. A story that Hollywood would never touch because it wasn't even interesting to them. All right, let's see if I can do this. All they were interested in were those couple of years that she worked at the FBI. But her real life story is so much more interesting, don't you think? My whole world had stopped. It was winter. I knew I needed to work with living things and get out of the house. And I got a temporary job at a local greenhouse for a couple of weeks. And God was already opening new doors for me. He brought my friend Brandy through that door. We met at the greenhouse. I don't know what I would do without her. We traveled together. She's from Missoula originally. Still from Missoula, sorry, Brandy. I guess once Montana, always Montana. But she does have a place in Ohio, and she has a job there, and she travels with me. Let's see. Oh, we're going to go backwards here. There's Sue in her, there's Sue and Rodney during COVID in some of the hospital stays that we stayed in. Let me see what the next picture is we might have missed. All right, there's Brandy with Rodney. Oh, we don't have it. All right, I'll backtrack. So one of the biggest things that God laid on Sue's heart is that us hearing people have a lot of distractions, and we have a difficult time listening to that still small voice of God. That was always a part of her speech. So she cashed in her retirement. She put everything she owned into purchasing property in Vermont, and she started a ministry called Waterbrooks. It's a retreat property, 113 acres on the side of a mountain. There we go, maybe. Yes. All right, let's backtrack. I'll show you the pictures you missed. There is Sue and Rodney in the hospital. A little story behind that. You know how a lot of times a hospital room will have 2 beds in it with a curtain in between? Well, during COVID, you couldn't put 2 patients in the same room. Rodney was convinced the second bed belonged to him. And you should have heard, and it was actually supposed to be for me, but you should have heard the nurse when she came on duty that night that we checked in. It was 3 a.m. when we finally got to this room. And the nurse walked in the room, turned around and walked out, and she said, "Does anyone know there's a dog in 3A?" So of course Sue couldn't hear it, so I quickly turned around and I moved my lips so she could read them, and I repeated what the girl said, and we had a good laugh about that. Okay, and there is Brandy with Rodney. And I was just telling you about how she travels with me now to conferences. She knows. If you want to know something about Sue and I'm not available, you can ask her. She knows so much about Sue, because for the first year that I was working through my grief and Sue was not part of my life, I talked a lot about Sue. Not everybody wants to hear all that when you've lost someone. You kind of sometimes keep it bottled, that you don't want to keep talking about this person that you're missing. But she didn't mind, and she learned a lot. She knows Sue's colors, her food, you name it, she knows it. I'm shocked sometimes what I hear that she knows. All right, let's see here. Where were we? Oh, so here we are traveling. Brandy worked in a greenhouse, can you tell? Everywhere we go, we're going home with plants. In fact, we're going home with plants from Montana. In fact, she said, can you bring your big suitcase and put the books in the big suitcase so we can sell books, so we have room for plants to go home? So please buy books, okay? So we have room for the plants that Brandy has accumulated. Oh. Okay, we are at a couple of conferences. Okay, here we are at Waterbrooks. We live in such a noisy world. Busy, busy, busy. You have a lot of quiet places here in here in Montana. Sorry, Vermont is French for Montana, which is Spanish, so we have a little bit in common. We get so busy with our relationships, our families, our jobs. Even though there's quietness, we forget to go. We need to remember to take time and to be still and to know that He is God. And we need to go up into the mountain and pray. When Jesus walked this earth, what did He do? He went up into the mountain to pray, to be alone with His Father. And it's not just once, it's over and over in Scripture. So when you read those Gospels again, look for that. How many times He went because He needed the strength to deal with the daily. He didn't go and hide out and be a hermit. He went and spent the night in prayer so that He could go and strengthen the people that He walked among. Because it's in the silence that we find that strength to keep going forward and get through that next door. And Sue had a passion for that. She knew what it was to be able to close her eyes, and she was in a silent place. But us hearing people, we get distracted. Someone clears their throat or drops a book or whatever. The dryer goes off, the microwave dings, and our mind goes somewhere else, and we're not thinking about being alone with the Father. And so her passion was to create this place where people could come. And the Lord took us to Vermont. What we did not know when we went to Vermont was that it is a very dark place spiritually. I've heard people say that when they can feel the darkness when they come to Vermont. There's about 2% of the people are believers that attend church, and that's any kind of church. It's an unchurched state. And at first we wondered if God had not if God made a mistake, if we made a mistake in hearing what God was asking us to do to buy this land. And we thought about selling it and going somewhere else where it would be a little easier. And we were praying on the porch one day. So this picture was taken from the porch. And we're looking out at the pond, and Sue opened her eyes, and she says, I know what we're putting on that island. We're going to put a cross so that the world will know that our feet will not be moved. And so that is actually a 21-foot cross. And there would be those moments of discouragement, feeling overwhelmed, and one or the other of us would say, maybe we should give up and we should sell this place. It's a hard place. It's really not, having a difficult time seeing God at work. And then we'd go, well, what are we supposed to do? Just cut down the cross? And for some reason, that just didn't feel right. It's pretty raw land. There's a little primitive cabin. Let me see if I have. We have our own little waterfalls there on the property. The whole front of the property is a brook. Therefore, we call it Waterbrooks. From Psalm 42, as the deer longs for the water brooks, so my soul longs for you, O God. That's our scene at night, so there's very little light pollution. I suspect you might have the same here. I'll find out tonight. The cross has a solar light on it, and you can see it, and you can see the stars, and it's just a place to remember and to think about the Lord. This is the little office building, a mini barn that we've insulated and run electricity to. The cabin itself has no electricity. It's a little primitive cabin. Sue loved it. She could go from a 5-star hotel to a little log cabin with no running water or electricity as easily as if she went from being an actress to the Amish. I mean, this was Sue. She was a life of contrasts. The next step is to build a little prayer cabin. And we were looking at Joe and Julie's cabin where we're going to be staying tonight. And Joe, I got to get your plans because it's absolutely what we're looking for at Waterbrooks, just a little place where people can come. A little mini barn, a little tiny home, nothing fancy, comfortable, so that the richest of the rich could come and it's a comfortable place. And the poorest of the poor could come and they would be at peace. And that was Sue's vision for this place. But the point is to have a place that's dedicated and set apart, because you can go into your backyard, but you're thinking of the weeds. Or you can go to a state park, but somebody's there walking their dog, or they're playing music or whatever. And so she felt we needed a place that was dedicated, that was prayed over, that was sanctified, that was set apart, and people could come and find a place for renewal and refreshing and restoring. We became involved in a little local community church about 6 miles down the road. The pastor is on the board of directors. So Sue Thomas Ministries is a 501c3 nonprofit. And Pastor Josh recognizes from personal experience how quickly it is, how easily it is, and how quickly you can burn out in Christian ministry when you're actively engaging with darkness constantly. And so he also has a passion for those other ministry leaders of New England who are struggling the same way he is. The churches are small. The people grow very slowly. They're very set in their ways, very old New England traditional people. And so, we continue with Sue Thomas Ministries, not as a tribute to her, but she was simply a vessel that understood the silence because of her deafness, and she lived in a world of silence all her life. How important it is for us to sit still. So one day, shortly after she left this earth, I was catching up on spending time with the Lord. And I read that story of Elijah and Elisha. When Elijah was caught up in a whirlwind and the mantle fell on Elisha. And I had that same presence come into my life where I was on my knees with tears and the goosebumps on my arms. And I said, Lord, here I am. I don't know what you want of me, but I know you're in this. I cannot go back to being the person I was 20 years ago because of all this life's experiences you have taken to shape me into becoming who I am supposed to be from here on out. And so we're doing this not in honor of Sue, but because it's God's vision. A place where people can come to do business with God, to wrestle with him, to draw closer to him, to work through life, to discover what doors he's asking them to go through. A place where there will be no distractions. I already have people coming, some with camper trailers, some bring tents. This is part of our work crew that comes. They come from surrounding states or from North Carolina or from Texas. They come in small buses and are helping to carve out and develop the land. Again, Brandy has become my projects manager. She's a toolbox girl. And Sue knew that God knew that Sue needed a nurse, and he put me in her life. God knows that my head is somewhere up in the clouds most of the time in an ethereal kind of way, and I needed somebody who had good practical gifts with their hands. Let's see what else we have here. As you can see, there's Sue in the wheelchair. That's the side of our little cabin, some of our work crew. On a volunteer day, we do a couple of volunteer work weekends every year. And she was right there, always engaged, always connecting with people. So I'm here to ask for your help. Because right now I'm the director of Sue Thomas Ministries. And every penny that Sue earned, she put right back into ministry. People sometimes think because there was a TV show, there must be royalties. None of that's true. In truth, there never was much money. They gave a platform for her to go out and speak, and she has world-renowned name recognition. And that is a big thing. But everything that she earned and the money that came in, including her retirement money, she poured it into ministry and ministry trips. Oh, there's Brandy. She's kind of coordinating the work crew there. I think those are flowers from the greenhouse in Ohio that we hauled to Vermont because, you know, we're in a different growing zone. And the greenhouse flowers look better in Ohio when we plant them in Vermont. Sue and I never had a formal working relationship. And I shared this publicly for the first time Sunday. She left the house and the car in my name, and she left the bank account with not very much in it, because she constantly poured out into the lives of others, the homeless ministry, Building Vermont, into daily life, because we need to invest in eternity, not here. So she never gave me $1. We were simply ministry partners serving the Lord together. That was our agreement from the beginning. If I would be willing to come alongside her as her travel companion and nurse, she would take care of my daily living expenses. And I have no regrets. The last 2 decades have been the adventure of a lifetime. Oh, there's Brandy with Rodney. So Rodney, last summer, Rodney turned 15. And then he began to go downhill. I could see he was getting weaker. The vet confirmed he had hemangiosarcoma. I knew it was only time. So here comes all of my herbs and supplements, and we're taking care of sweet Rodney, because he had some public appearances he had to make, where he was actually the star. We were at an event down in North Carolina in October. We got him this little wagon so we wouldn't have to walk so much. They made these T-shirts. It was a conglomeration of like 6 counties, the public school, high school students running for track meet. So this was a completely secular event, and Rodney made, was it 4 or 5 appearances? I've forgotten. At the Rotary Club, the public library where we read the book Levi Hears for Sue to the kids. Came to this track meet, and all of the runners were given this shirt not by us, but by the guy who was organizing it, with Rodney's face on it. And it said, "Staying in the race." And I'm like, God, you've got to keep Rodney alive till this event is over. We can't show up without the star of this event. On our way home to Vermont, Rodney began to fail. And I realized our time with God's quiet little servant Rodney was coming to an end. We did make it back to Waterbrooks, the ministry in Vermont, and we said goodbye to Rodney. He served quietly, he served with joy, and he set a great example. Going from Hollywood, he went from Hollywood to India, to the hospital ministry, to the homeless ministry. He blessed doctors and nurses. He did exactly what God created him to do. He brought God glory by being faithful and doing what he was called to do. And all I can say about Rodney, and I wish he was here, but you know something, I wouldn't be here if he was still with me, because it's a long drive and I wouldn't have put him on the plane. So all I can say is, well done, good and faithful servant Rodney. So right now, I want you to listen with me. In that great cloud of witnesses surrounding us right now, I can faintly hear Sue Thomas and all the others who've gone on before us, cheering us on. They're saying, it will be worth it all when we see Jesus. Just hang on, trust him, and it's going to be the most incredible ride of your life. That's all I have. I don't know who's closing, but.
I found that very interesting. When you
have any questions. Yes? Do what? Sign it? I don't sign. No. Peace. No, I don't sign. So I've been around a lot of deaf people. I can actually communicate with them when I'm with them. But when people say, oh, give me a sentence or something, my mind goes blank. But if I'm with deaf people, then it's like slipping into a language. Like I can communicate, but not fluently. I was primarily Sue's oral interpreter, which means that if you were speaking, she would look at me from like I would hear you, she would look at me, and I would simply move my lips. Maybe? So that is sign language for maybe. And so that's called oral interpreting. So even sermons, we would usually sit in the back. We sat in the front once and realized that it was distracting the preacher. He was like, who are those two rude ladies? And his wife, who was a special ed teacher, goes, no, I think one of them was deaf. And so we realized it was better to sit in the back. But she was so used to having to sit in the front so she could see the speaker's face. But all it takes is for a person to turn around or to look down, and she was missing. So for the first time in her life, she was getting the sermons word for word as I oral interpreted. I had no special training for that, except I had a pastor dad that told us to pay attention. So you learn to focus. Yeah, anybody else have a question? Yes. She was just a little bit nasal. And she did that deliberately because she could feel the vibrations of her nose, so she knew she was giving voice. Okay, so Sue was also a classically trained pianist. She understood music. She had 10 years of speech therapy. Speech therapy, she would go home and she would stand in front of a mirror. Her mom would take her, started when she was like 2.5. And she would stand in front of a mirror with the person next to her moving their lips, and she would have to imitate that. And so the point was teaching her how to read lips, but she learned to speak in the process. And in the process, somehow they released her voice, because a lot of deaf people talk in a monotone if they speak at all. And she had a lot of emotion. If you listen to her tell her own story, they released her emotions. And so here's an interesting little tidbit. She always told me, be nice to me after I'm gone. Here's an interesting little tidbit, that they had released her emotions through her voice, and that's what made her a passionate speaker. She could stand before a crowd, and her heart came out her voice. But if we were having an argument or a fight, I would be like, you're upset with me. No, I'm not. Yes, you are. I can hear it in your voice. Like I held the trump card because I knew she was upset with me. Like we hear ourselves be upset, so we change our voice. She wasn't even aware of that. So what she felt came through her voice, always. If she was happy, it came through her voice. If she was excited or she was giving you encouragement from her heart, it came through her voice. But she learned, she also loved to sing. So one of my favorite things is, my favorite memories is the fact that she loved to sing. She knew hymns by heart. She would sing the miles away in the car, verse after verse. Not always in perfect pitch, but I don't know if anyone here knows John Overholt's family of the Christian Hymnary. Their family sings, and they sing in 4-part harmony. And we were in their home once, and she put her hands on the two men's throats, and the girls rested their chins in her arms, and she said, "It's more incredible than playing a pipe organ to hear all those vibrations." So it was all vibrations, and she was so good that she could match pitch her voice to their voice through vibrations until the MS took that sensation from her. So by the time I knew her, she was losing the feeling in her hands and feet. And yep. Anyone else have a question that a group might be interested in? Yes. Sure. She was there. Yeah, so she was there for about 3.5 years. And during that time, there was downtime, so there wasn't cases all the time. She was responsible for putting the mayor of Washington, D.C. behind bars for selling drugs. That, most of the time, she would simply say it's classified information, but that came out in the newspaper after he died. And they talked about how a special situation it was a special sting operation in a hotel room. So they had one hotel room that was joined to another. They had wired cameras in. They had agents coming in as if they were purchasing drugs. Sue was in the next room. So she wasn't actually in the line of fire, but she was in the next room, and she was watching everything on the cameras. And they got it, and they arrested him, and he went to prison for it. And that was in the 80s, and then when he died, that made the newspapers, and it was like, well, it's public now, because it actually, they gave credit to a special scenario. So I can tell you that. But most of the time, she would simply say, what she did was classified. The TV series was dramatized. There was no Jack. Or Jack was actually an older married man. So I'm going to break your hearts, guys. It's an older married man, father figure that helped her understand what was happening at the FBI. No, I am not Jack and Sue's daughter, although people have thought that over the years, so. Yeah. And she did go to the gun range, and she did target practice, and it was required that you wear ear protection, so she did. So a little bit of that strong will happening there. But she didn't have any ears to destroy, so. It was a pretty short stint. She tells the story. She tells this in her DVD, or you can find it online as well. When she was at the FBI, she actually was not a believer. So she grew up in a traditional mainstream type of church. So she grew up thinking she was a pretty good person. And at the FBI, she realized she was carrying a lot of anger. She actually was pretty high up as far as in the social circles, going to senators' parties, and she was in the Oval Office. That one picture was actually her in the Oval Office at the President's Oval Office in the White House. So she was living a pretty high life and good pay, unique job, and she realized she was still carrying a lot of anger, extreme anger. She would go home and she would rip up things and destroy things because of the anger in her life. And so she gave away what she had earned to a Catholic monastery, and she went to a Bible college. And while she was there, God met her. And it was a pretty humiliating experience because she wanted friends desperately enough that she lied and said she was dying of cancer. So she had suddenly had face-to-face, not just social group activities, but friends that were involved in her life. And so I'm not going to, tell that whole story, because you can hear that in her own words with the emotion of her own voice as she tells her conversion story. But she left the FBI to go to Bible college, and at Bible college, someone asked if she would be interested in doing a speech about deaf ministry, which she didn't know anything about, but she was deaf, so she spoke about that. And one thing led to another. She became a motivational speaker. And that's when I met her. So, yeah, a little bit more, she holds a lot more intrigue than those 3 years. Yeah. Anyone else have a question? I mean, I could stay till midnight and talk, but I know that that's not going to work for most of you. All right, I'll be back at the book table with Brandy. Or catch me with a cup of coffee. And feel free to ask any questions. And remember, I was a very painfully shy person. So I know if you're feeling shy and you don't want to really come up and ask, I know what you're feeling like. You just come up anyway and talk to me, all right?